Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to What on Earth is Happening right here on the Revolution Broadcasting Radio Network. I'm your host, Mark Passio. My website is whatonearthishappening.com. The network's website, revolutionbroadcasting.com. This show is live every Tuesday evenings from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time. We have a packed show lined up for you here today. We are going to continue the discussion that we started last week about food. Food as a methodology of mind control through the destabilizing of the body and the mind-body connection. That's what we're going to continue to talk about here today. And in the coming couple weeks, this is such a big topic. It's such an important topic. It touches everyone that eats, that is. As far as I know, that's everyone on this planet. And, not to belabor the point, and make this a show about food, but this is such a critically important topic to understand and to really grab the reins of, because it is something that we have within a modicum of our own control, what we eat, what we put into our bodies. When we understand just how important that is, this topic becomes one of the most critical topics in the entire world, particularly as it relates to human freedom. And what I'm going to try to do over the next couple weeks is really help people understand how the topic of food and the topic of human freedom are inextricably interwoven. So that's going to be the topic of discussion here this evening. Let's jump right into the topic, which is a continuation from last week. And as I said last week, I prepared a laundry list of aspects through which to talk about this problem. And that is what we will be doing in this portion of unfolding this topic about food. We will be talking about what is wrong. We will be talking about the problems with our food. We'll get into solutions at another time. We will be discussing some solutions as we talk about some of the problems, but mostly this is to alert people, this portion of talking about food, okay? It's to alert people who may not be aware of some of the problems that are currently present in the food that we buy and eat. And I'll tell you something, there are not as many people who are conscious of this as we might think. Some of the people who are aware of the problems with our food. It is not as widespread knowledge as some people may think. And this is why I'm doing this portion of the show, because I see with my own eyes some of the types of diets that people have in the freedom movement itself. And it is an ongoing issue. Knowledge is the first part of it, and then willpower is the second part of it. Because all the knowledge in the world without the willpower to put it into proper action is useless. Knowledge is not power, contrary to the popular saying. The application of knowledge is power. That's wisdom. If knowledge is used in a way that can support our ongoing evolutionary development to higher states of awareness and consciousness, then it becomes wisdom. And that's when it is power. That's when it becomes powerful. Knowledge in and of itself is simply a potential. And that's what this show is about. It's to put that potential power out there for people, help them to understand some things that they may not currently be aware of, and then they're in an empowered position to take right action in the world with that knowledge. So last week, some of the aspects of food that we covered were chemical pesticides and fertilizers that are used to grow crops. and how dangerous some of them are. Many of them are. Preservatives that are added to give food longer shelf lives. Very, very poisonous substances that are added as preservatives to our food. We talked about food processing, pre-packaging food in the name of convenience, but essentially robbing the nutrient value from that food. And more of the food is necessitated to basically make up for the lost nutrient density of the food when it is heavily processed. We talked about chemical dyes and bleaches that are used in foods to make it look more attractive. We talked about excessive amounts of refined white sugar, white flour, high fructose corn syrup. We briefly mentioned excitotoxins, artificial sweeteners. These are Splenda or sucralose, saccharin, of course, aspartame, which was originally developed as a nerve agent. Yes, you heard me right. It was originally developed as a neurotoxin nerve agent, a military application. And then, since that didn't work out for the company, Searle Pharmaceuticals, they decided to market it as an artificial sweetener. And that's a true story. You can research the origins of aspartame. Now, what I didn't mention last week were the alternatives to artificial sweeteners that people should be aware of. And there are some good ones. There's agave. There's raw honey. Now, if you're watching your blood glucose levels, I myself am diabetic. I have type 1 diabetes, which is a juvenile form of diabetes. My pancreas does not create the necessary insulin to take the carbohydrates out of the bloodstream and into the cells. So blood sugar builds up in the blood. This is for my condition of diabetes. It was a latent onset. They call it adult onset juvenile diabetes. Some people refer to it as a type 1.5, but essentially it's a form of type 1 diabetes. So I have to watch the carbohydrates that I take in and sugar that I take in. So a natural alternative to some of these artificial sweeteners is stevia. Stevia. If you haven't heard of it, check it out, look it up. It is a natural herbal sweetener, stevia. So that's an alternative to these excitotoxin, and yes, that is what they are. Neuroscientists have categorized these substances as excitotoxins, these artificial sweeteners like aspartame, sucralose, saccharin, etc. They are a category of compounds referred to as excitatory neurotransmitters. Excitatory neurotransmitters. If you look up that term, that's basically what an excitotoxin is classified as scientifically. They are excitatory neurotransmitters. That's the class of compounds that artificial sweeteners are generally classified as by neuroscience. Excitatory neurotransmitters. Look up that term. And if you look up who some of the funding is provided by to do some of the research on the health effects of artificial sweeteners, you see that whenever you look at research that has been funded by the organizations that use or manufacture these compounds, these dangerous chemicals, you'll see that the results always magically turn out to be safe, that they are considered safe for human consumption. Whenever an independent investigatory agency or scientific team does the research on these compounds, you see that they always find many health detriments that are caused, fundamentally connected to these chemical compounds. So stay away from the chemical artificial sweeteners. You're not doing yourself any favor by not using sugar, although refined white sugar is just as dangerous in many cases if a lot of it is used. Switch to raw sugar, turbinado cane sugar. Turbinado cane sugar is a great alternative. Again, if you're watching your sugar intake in general, or if you're diabetic, stevia is a great alternative. Some people use xylitol as an alternative sweetener as well. So those are the excitotoxins, the artificial sweeteners. I posted a great video on my website in the podcast section about excitotoxins by Dr. Russell Blaylock, a leading neurosurgeon. So moving on, trans fats is something we didn't really mention much. Trans fats groove the arteries around the heart, making cholesterol lodge in them. Cholesterol would not ordinarily be a problem. People think it's a dangerous substance. It isn't. The body would normally handle cholesterol fine. There are a few things that create problems with cholesterol lodging in the arteries. This is the grooving of the arteries of the heart, and this is caused by the intake of trans fats. So homogenized oils. You want to stay away from homogenized oils, homogenized vegetable oil, any kind of homogenized oils. This is a trans fat, and it grooves the arteries. It creates heart disease. Doctors are so concerned about cholesterol levels. Cholesterol would not be a problem if it were not for a few substances and processes that are in our diets, trans fats being one of the biggest. The other thing is chlorine intake. And almost all municipal water supplies have chlorine in some form added to the water supply, the water reserves that we drink if we drink tap water, and that we bathe in if we bathe in, normal house water that comes in through our indoor plumbing without any filtration done to it. So chlorine in water is extremely dangerous. And this is whether you're bathing in it, washing your hands in it, anything. Chlorine gets into the skin very quickly, goes through the pores. Drinking it is the worst thing to do. But we bathe in this stuff. We breathe in the vapors from it. I know you can tell in Philadelphia for sure there's tons of chlorine or a chlorine derivative in our water supply. This creates arterial grooving as well. Chlorine grooves the interior lining of the arteries, therefore creating heart blockages. This is why heart disease is so prevalent in the United States. It's the #1 cause of death in this country. So trans fats, stay away from them. Try to stay away from chlorine. If you could afford whole house filtration systems, do it. If not, colder showers are better than warmer ones because it doesn't create as much vaporization of the water. Definitely get on to purified drinking water instead of drinking tap water, which brings us to one of the next things, fluoride in the water supply. Fluoride is a poison. It is a derivative of a byproduct, actually, of the aluminum manufacture industry. Yes, you heard right. If you're not aware of this, fluoride added to our drinking water in most municipal townships has fluoride added to it. This is a poison. It's used as the main ingredient in all forms of rat poison. It was added to prisoner of war drinking water to keep them docile in prisoner of war camps and other concentration camps, because it basically calcifies the pineal gland. It destroys the will to resist. It basically destabilizes the thought processes. It creates imbalance in the neocortex. You're on a lot of fluoridated water, critical thinking is going to become more difficult. resistance to any kind of control is going to become more difficult. Wanting to stand up for yourself, wanting to take personal responsibility is going to be slowly bred out. And this is done by design. This is done by social engineers that know what this compound is capable of doing to the brain. And people think, oh, they wouldn't do that. They think it helps your teeth. Nonsense. Nonsense. They know exactly what it does. Maybe not the dumb people, the unread people who are just following their orders and adding this stuff because they get a paycheck, who don't care. As long as I get a paycheck, I'll do whatever I'm told. Add whatever poison I'm handed into drinking water. And ultimately, they're responsible. They're the people who are responsible for doing this, because if you didn't agree to do it, it wouldn't get done. And that's another reason this, I talk about this all the time. That's the reason the show, isn't very popular with people who don't want to hear that the answer to all the problems of the world is personal responsibility. Because I'm not the person, if you're going to listen to this show, to hear blame placed on the elites, and this higher class of controllers that controls everybody's waking actions, you're not going to get that on this show. Yeah, they're manipulators. They manipulate things. They try to keep information out of people's hands. But you know who does that ultimately? We do. We take the actions that they tell us to take. We sanitize the information in the media and in the schools because we want a paycheck. See, that's how it works. And that's horribly unpopular right there, speech like that, what I'm saying. Horribly unpopular. No one wants to hear that we're the ones who does this to ourselves. They want to hear it's all something that's out there, out in the external reality. You want to know who your enslaver is? Look in the mirror. That's who your enslaver is. When we get out of those modes of thinking and get up to a higher level of consciousness, that situation will end because we'll stop enslaving ourselves. We'll stop doing actions that are ultimately immoral and wrong. And one of the best ways to start that process is to stop eating poison. When we get onto healthy food, we start building our brain in a better way. And that helps us to make more informed decisions and choices about what we do and how we act in the world. And that's why food is such a critically important issue. Okay? They need to control people's minds, and they need them softened up in order to do that. So if they can get them destabilized and in a complete state of imbalance by the junk that people put into their bodies. And man, I'm telling you, I need to look no further than my own family. Some of the things, the diets of people in my family. I don't even know where to begin. Don't know where to begin. Chocolate-covered marshmallow treats, candy wafers, those thin wafers with the cream in them? Yeah, they love them. They eat them up. Juice drinks, chips with tons of hydrogenated vegetable oil, peanut butter with hydrogenated vegetable oil, white bread, real high nutritional value, good stuff. And wonder why they have no will to resist, can't pay attention for any length of time. Smoking 2 packs of cigarettes daily, drinking 8 cups of coffee with 6 spoons of sugar in each cup of white refined sugar or artificial sweeteners, and then wondering why you can't think straight, why you can't pay attention, why you have no will to resist. It's a mystery. I can't figure it out. What a mystery. So let's move on to something else. So we talked about, the trans fats, that's one of the things that grooves the arteries. Chlorine is another. The third thing is homogenized dairy. Okay? This is an unnatural process of homogenization, and it also creates problems with the artery walls. It also will create grooving. These 3 things in conjunction, if people stayed away from these things, 90% of heart disease would disappear. And your doctor won't tell you this, folks, because they get no nutrition training. They get no nutritional training in medical school. They're convinced that the body is purely a computer, there's no mind-body connection, and they won't tell you that what you put into your body based on what you eat and drink is basically what generates your health. A simple truth. So simple, it's almost comical. You can almost laugh hysterically at how simple it is, and yet people still don't get it. You are what you eat. At least the body computer's part of you, and make no mistake, I'm not claiming, when I use the word body computer, the body has a component of it that acts like a biological computer. In no way am I saying that is who we are. I'm saying that is a component of the body component of who we are. Okay? That is a component of it. It is one part in the holistic whole that makes up our physical makeup in the 3D world. Okay? The body is not simply a computer. It is more than that, because it is connected to the mind. It is connected to higher states of consciousness and awareness. It's connected to spirit, ultimately. So these three levels work as one. They work in conjunction with each other: spirit, mind, and body. Body being the lowest level, mind being above that, and then spirit being above that. But again, in order to control that middle layer, that mind component that exists between the body and our true spiritual selves, the higher self, they need to destabilize the body as well. If the body is working in good functioning condition and there is proper brain health, it is much more difficult to manipulate and control the mind. Therefore, food is one of the most powerful weapons in the arsenal of the manipulator who wants to exercise mind control over a population. I mean, this logically follows. The mind is the layer they're going after. They can't control the spirit. Impossible. It is uncontrollable, because it is the base essence of everything that is. So if they ultimately want to control the body, they have to control the mind, which is the layer that acts as a buffer between body and spirit. And the best way of doing that is to attack the body and destabilize the brain. Is the physiological layer that acts as a liaison between mind and body. So that's what it's all ultimately about. That's why all of this is happening in our food supply and in our food chain. And this is by design. Social engineers, psychopathic social engineers, understand perfectly how this works. They understand this because essentially they are occultists, and they are utilizing knowledge that is essentially the most ancient forms of psychology, the study of the human psyche that have existed and have been passed down generations through different networks of occultism and secret societies. And if you don't believe that, you're extraordinarily naive. This is something that the freedom movement oftentimes will not look at. They want to think it's all political. They want to think it's only about, hey, who can we vote in to represent us, and they'll fix it. They'll make it all better. You talk about the occult with these people, they don't want to acknowledge its existence. Like little frightened children, I call them the tent pitchers. I'm going to take my tent as I'm marching up this mountain. I told you I would go all the way up to the peak, to the summit with you, and you're trying to show me something that exists way past the mid-level of the mountain and way up near the summit area, and I don't want to go that far. I'm taking my tent out of my backpack, I'm setting it up right here, maybe a third or halfway up the mountain, and that's it, I'm done. The tent pitchers. Let's pitch my tent halfway up the climb to enlightenment and say this far and no further. Well, good luck with that. Good luck with that. Let me know when you're done with that. And I'll be here explaining to you what's really going on in the world. Okay? Because if you want to ignore the occult aspect of this, you have a partial picture, and that's the most dangerous thing there is somebody with half knowledge. Half knowledge. I'll listen to part of it, and then I'll just discard what I'm not comfortable with no investigation. Einstein said the that condemnation without investigation is the epitome of human ignorance. Condemnation without investigation is the epitome of human ignorance. Absolutely true. People don't want to look at things. They want to make up their mind. Their mind is already made up. Some people don't think mind control exists and is real. Right in the freedom movement, they'll tell you there's no such thing. Totally asleep. Anybody that thinks this is totally asleep. You've woken up to a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of the reality you're embedded in. And good luck staying there, frightened child, frightened little boy or girl. And again, this is not a popularity contest, folks. I don't come on the air to tell people what they want to hear or to make them feel comfortable. I don't come on the air to scare people either. I come on the air to tell people what's going on and to empower them if they really want to make a change and if they really want to understand the causal factors that has created what we call the human condition and how to get out of this condition and into a better one. That's why I come on the air. I'm not here to make friends. I'm not your guru. I'm not your buddy. Okay? I don't do this because I think doing this is going to make me a lot of friends, in case you haven't figured that out. So, to get back on the topic of food, okay? Yes, this is social engineering. This is by design. People are being poisoned by design. It's a hard thing to accept. That's a difficult thing for most people to swallow. But that's what's going on. Because a tiny fraction who's controlling all of these industries and who's controlling government, who's controlling finance, they know what they're doing, and they're calculating it very deliberately. They know how this mind-body-spirit connection works, and they're out to destabilize the body. Attacks on every front on the body. It's the front lines. Okay? So the three things that create arterial grooving, trans fats, essentially hydrogenated oil. Stay away from margarine. Oh, margarine is pure poison. Pure poison. And in the past, they would tell people how good it is, how great of a substitute for butter it was. Do not buy margarine. It is poison. All of it. It creates heart disease, and it's still on the market. This is still being sold. All right? Trans fats, chlorine in our water that we drink or shower in, and homogenized dairy. If you're going to eat dairy, try to eat raw dairy, raw milk, raw cheese. Live enzymes still in it that are not killed in the pasteurization process or the homogenization process. Homogenization is not good for you. Okay. Let me briefly talk about another form of excitotoxin, monosodium glutamate, MSG. This is a taste enhancer. This and other taste enhancers are also excitotoxins. They are excitatory neurotransmitters. MSG, monosodium glutamate. It's a poison, is what it is. And they add it to the food because it basically ignites on the surface of the tongue and makes everything taste better. A taste enhancer. Okay? That's why they add it into food. People get addicted to things with MSG in it because they're getting a rush, like a drug when it first hits them. That's how they're making food taste better. Adding these taste enhancers like MSG. MSG is an excitotoxin. Stay away from it. The entire fast food diet, McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, etc. And I talked about last week how I was hooked on this junk. Hey, listen, I'm no perfect being. I never claimed to be a perfected being. I've claimed to be an enlightened person, but I'm by no means perfect. The two things are completely separate and different from each other. I don't think anybody in a physical body is perfect or going to be. If you're here, you're not perfect. There's room for improvement. Okay? So my diet, man, I can't even barely fathom what my diet used to be like compared to what it is now. I can barely fathom it. I talked a little bit about that last week. It's comical now when I look back at the radical transformation. I used to eat at all these fast food places, and I mean a lot, multiple times a week. And I mean big quantities of it. Supersize, like in the movie Supersize Me. 2 Big Macs. Not one wasn't good enough. I was overweight, probably by over 35, 40 pounds. I weigh right at the 200-pound mark now, and that's right about where I should be for my size and bone density. But I was up there, pushing 240 at one point. And, I ate at these fast food restaurants constantly. Extremely high fat, extremely high calorie, caloric intake, trans fats, processed food, excess of sugar, excess of white flour, excitotoxins, high fructose corn syrup. You name it. This is a poison culture. Stop giving your money to these places. That isn't food. It's sewage. And there are people out in the freedom movement that eat this junk. They still eat this junk. They have not been turned on to the information about what's in our food and what we should stay away from. Again, I talked last week a little bit about the gentleman who really helped turn me on to a lot of this, and that was Kevin Trudeau, who's been talking about this for years. And Kevin Trudeau is an occultist, and I would venture to say he's one of the good guys. He is waking up. He is, largely woken up. He's got a great site. I think he's got a great radio show. I value Kevin Trudeau's information. His book, Natural Cures, really helped set me straight about what was in our food and what not to do and what to do. So I send a personal thanks to Kevin Trudeau for his great book, Natural Cures. And there are others. Deepak Chopra, actually, he talks about food in some of his material. He talks about the Ayurvedic, the Vedas information about food and diet in some of his work. And that helped me to understand some better dietary practices as well. So continuing on, let's look at genetically modified foods, done so that crops can grow bigger, done so that fields can turn over quicker, even though they're depleting the soil and the nutrients of the food. Monsanto. Check out The World According to Monsanto to understand their mentality about GMO. Selling Roundup, pesticide, and then making a seed that is Roundup ready or resistant to this pesticide. And you then get cornered into using that seed because nothing else will grow in the field. So this is insidious farming practices, all centered around genetic modification, not leaving nature's plan alone, trusting that nature has provided what we need in our diet, but getting in there and tinkering around with the genetic codes of nature and thinking we're going to do something good for ourselves as a result. Let me tell you something. I don't talk about it much in my material. I will if you come and see me at the UFO ET Congress, but genetic modification is a big part of the problem that's going on here, folks. And that's all I'll say about that. But if you want to hear more, come and check out the UFO ET Congress in Bordentown, where I'm speaking on November 14th. Genetic modification is not something we need to be doing when it comes to our food. it creates more problems than it solves. If we engaged in smart organic farming practices, we could feed the entire world 20 times over. And this is proven. So look into genetically modified organisms, GMO. And again, a lot of this information, it's thrown out there so you can do further research on your own. I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm here to put out what I have learned about what is actually going on in the world. That's why the show is called What on Earth is Happening, with no question mark. I've understood that this is what is taking place. If you research it and understand what I'm understanding, you can come to some similar conclusions and similar understandings if you put the work in to do the research. Hey, you can just believe me if you want. I don't recommend it. I don't think you should believe anybody. I think you should do your own research and come to your own conclusions. So, how about antibiotics that are added in milk and injected into animals as a result of the horrible factory farming practices that are engaged in? We could do a whole show on that. Growth hormones, antibiotics added to animals. We want to beef them up quicker, bigger and quicker. And then when we pen them and cage them in the most inhumane, vicious ways, and they get sores and illnesses as a result of their cramped quarters, then we want to inject them with antibiotics. It's ridiculous. Look, we could go on and on talking about that, and that's extraordinarily depressing. It's an extraordinarily depressing topic. If you look up factory farming and watch some videos about this, believe me, you'll need a strong constitution to even watch what is done to the animals that we think we have a right to do this to. I'm not going to get on to, preaching about not eating meat or anything like that. I've chosen to be vegetarian. The reason I've chosen to be vegetarian is because I don't believe we have a right to do that to other sentient beings. And that may sound crazy and out there and far-fetched to some people, even people in the freedom movement. But I'll tell you what, how I have come to understand the karmic forces work in this world, karma, or the law of attraction, essentially, the law of cause and effect. It is the principle of cause and effect, is that which we do to other life will be done to us. Quite simply, that's how the universe works. The universe is a gigantic mirror. What you put out into it is what you get back from it. And people will kill and die to avoid that being true, to ignore that. And guess what? That's natural law. It exists. It is in operation. It has been in operation since the dawn of creation and will be in operation until this universe is no longer here, which is going to be a long, 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 long time. So from the beginning to the end of creation, this natural law is in effect. What we put into this place is what we get back from this place. So I recommend people to, if they have the constitution to do so, watch the documentary called Earthlings. And I just opened the whole can of worms here, folks, for anybody that dares to do it. I'll try to post a link in the podcast section. You deserve a gold medal if you can get through this whole thing. I have thousands of documentaries and movies in my collection. Thousands. Okay? Earthlings is the one documentary that I have watched that I will never watch again. I will never sit through it again. I watched it twice. I watched it once and was so horrified and dumbstruck that I said, I can't even fathom what I just watched. And so about a week later, I watched it again for a second time, and that was it. I think it hammered the point I'm making here into me, which I won't belabor, but I'll just say, What we do to other life will be done to us, period. Now, run away from that all you want, but that's a true fundamental principle of the universe that is natural law. And you won't escape from it. You can run and deny it and ignore it all you want for as long as you want, in as many lifetimes as you want. And it will always be true. I fundamentally understand that. It took a long time for me to understand that. It took an unimaginable level of suffering for me to understand that. But I happen to understand that now. And so that's all I'll say about that. But should you still make the decision to continue to eat other sentient beings, then be aware that they are injected with dangerous growth hormones and antibiotics that basically enter our body and then build up resistance to bacteria in us. When we take excessive amounts of antibiotics, this is what happens. So that's getting into us in many ways. It's getting into us through the meat that people eat. It's getting into us through our water supply as well. I briefly touched on homogenized and pasteurized dairy products. Those are some other things to basically stay away from. Another thing I wrote down here is deceptive labeling of food products. See, it's not just what's in the food we eat, it's how it's labeled. They're not even telling us the truth about what's in some of these products. There's no truth in the ingredients list. They're starting to rename things. They want to rename high fructose corn syrup as crystalline fructose, as if, that makes it something other than what it is. They want to sell people on the idea that high fructose corn syrup, because it comes from corn, is somehow a natural product that is added to our food. And nothing could be farther from the truth. This is a manufactured chemical process in additive to food. And it is something that definitely destabilizes the critical thinking of the human brain when it is present in the body in high enough levels. And most people are sucking this stuff down, with soda that they drink. I was on Bob Tuskin's show this past Friday, and we talked about food. We talked about how some of the worst diets that you'll ever see are in police. I mean, you just look at how police eat when they're out in their patrol cars on the street and wonder why they think and act the way they do. It's no surprise. I was telling Bob I was in a CVS pharmacy parking lot a couple of days ago, and I saw a cop sitting at a Dunkin' Donuts next to it, eating a powdered jelly donut, and drinking a big, 32 or 64 ounce soda in one of those like 7-Eleven style big gulp cups. Great for you. Really good for the health of the brain. I'm sure it'll go a long way in helping you to act responsibly and morally. Right. So, deceptive labeling is another thing we need to watch out for. One of the things, it's a good example, how they'll package bread. They'll package bread and say, whole grains, made with whole grains. And it's basically white bread that's then, dyed or, has some grains sprinkled over the top of it to make it look like the whole loaf is baked with whole grains or, whole wheat. And it's not. It's a deceptive practice. When you see made with, you have to look at the ingredients label and see how much of that is in there. You want to basically look for organic. It's the whole product as being organic. All the ingredients, when you read the label, organic. Stay away from things with a lot of flour. I like Ezekiel bread. It's made with pure sprouted grains. If you're going to eat bread, I try to limit the total amount of bread I eat, period, because it's very carb heavy. And I watch the intake of carbs, but sprouted multi-grain bread is much better for you. I like flourless bread. These are heavy, hearty loaves of bread. You know, they're not light. Light bread basically means very little nutrient value. So heartier loaves of bread, you know, made with pure grains, organic grains, sprouted grains are what you want to look for. We talked about Monsanto and GMO and Roundup. Roundup has been linked to genetic damage. It has also been linked to endocrine system dysfunction. Documentation is available for that if you look up Roundup and genetic damage. Another thing I have here on my list is, you know, picking fruit very soon, too soon, that isn't even ripened, and then they artificially ripen it because they want to ship it quick. They want to, you know, they know it's going to be out on the road. They want to get it out there in order to transport it quicker. Pick it faster and ripen it artificially. And that's why there's such low quality of produce in a lot of places. Even if it is organic, you see that practice used. Now, they don't artificially ripen it, but sometimes they pick things too soon because they want to get it out there and transport it. Let's see what else we have here. Okay, so some of the documentaries that I mentioned. Food Inc. I posted a link to that, actually for a trailer to that. That's available on Netflix. For people who have access to that, you can check out Food Inc. Food Matters, I believe I posted that on the website. The Future of Food. The Fluoride Deception, I will post a link to that this week since we talked about fluoride in the drinking water. The Russell Blaylock, who gave a lecture called Excitotoxins, the Taste That Kills, named after his book of the same title. This guy is great. He is a neurosurgeon and neuroscientist who is really telling the truth about artificial sweeteners. And I really commend Russell Blaylock. He also talks about how they destabilize brain function. He gets into the whole chemical dumbing down of the masses. He really speaks the truth, Russell. Again, an invaluable resource. Everybody should really check out the work of Russell Blaylock. Blaylock. Kevin Trudeau, again, his name is Trudeau. Kevin Trudeau. He wrote the book called Natural Cures. If you Google his name, you'll get a whole bunch of stuff that's negative about him trying to engage in unfair business practices. I've ordered things from him, and I've always gotten it in a timely manner, exactly what said was going to be shipped. I'm not really sure about some of those things. I don't know if maybe his operation was set up in a much worse way in the past and he had problems, but all my dealings with him have been fine. So specifically, don't judge somebody by what you hear about other people saying about them, okay? You hear their own words. Go and check out Kevin Trudeau's website and his radio show. He has his own radio show. Gauge him by the information he puts out into the world, and I think you'll see it's excellent information. So that's Kevin Trudeau. Generation RX. We'll talk about this a little bit next week, because next week I'm going to get into the drugs component of this. Okay? So we'll look at pharmaceuticals and the pharmaceutical industry. A great documentary to check out about that is Generation RX. I mentioned today Monsanto, this big agriculture giant that engages in horrendous business practices and horrendous environmental practices. Check out the documentary The World According to Monsanto. And finally, another documentary I recommend, but not for the faint of heart. I'm giving a warning, not even a disclaimer, an outright warning. This documentary can really wake you up to a lot, but also, you better have a strong constitution if you're going to sit and watch this entire documentary. It's called Earthlings. Earthlings, as in people from Earth, beings from Earth. Okay, Earthlings. And if you can get through this whole thing, more power to you. Again, I watched it twice just to hammer it into myself, and by the end of the second time I watched it, I was literally curled up on the couch, practically in a fetal position. That's how disturbing this documentary is. And when you see what humanity has become, when you watch this video, when you see what the real inner demons of human beings, how they express, and this documentary will show it to you better than no other. But don't say I didn't warn you. If you want to watch it, you'll become more enlightened than you were about what's done with our food. And you just think, we are consuming that energy. You don't think that that's an energetic vibration that then goes into what you're eating? You have no idea how the universe works. None. And I would suggest you're also very naive. So watch Earthlings, see what's done. Meet your meat, so to speak. See what is actually done to the food that we eat, that we think, we believe we have a right to do this. And know that that's the energy that you're eating. I'm not going to tell anybody, become a vegetarian. I'm going to say, look at what's done as far as animal practices and factory farming techniques are concerned, and then you make a decision about whether that's what you want to contribute to. Whether that's the consciousness that you want to contribute to. And I would suggest we are penned animals because we do this. One of the reasons is because we do this to other living beings. And I think we'll continue to be penned animals until those practices stop. But that's just me. You don't have to believe that. You don't have to accept that. We're into the second hour now, and we've been talking about food as a methodology of mind control. That's what we have been discussing over the last many weeks on this show. Methods of mind control. This is methodology number 9 out of 14 overall popular methods that are used by dominators, controllers, manipulators. They have multifaceted techniques which they use to get into our body-mind-computer system, so to speak, and hack it, so that they basically are controlling us from a fundamental level, a level of mind-body connection that most of us are unaware of. This is subtle manipulation in many cases, and is done without the awareness of the person being manipulated or controlled, at least at a conscious level. They're not aware of it. And that's what this show is about. It is about bringing these methodologies to people's attention so that they can empower themselves and take methods to steel themselves against these techniques. This is about empowerment. It is not about fear. You have to strike down fear. You have to have courage to look at what is taking place. This isn't negative for the New Agers out there. This isn't negative. It isn't negative to say, hey, a storm's coming, you might want to batten down the hatches. That's preparation. Okay? It's awareness. And it's then taking proper action in a state of awareness. And that's never negative. That's never negative. I'm not saying, totally constantly be paranoid about the worst and constantly be on, guard about being poisoned at every turn. I'm saying this is a deliberate thing that is done with our food for a specific reason. And once we become aware of it, we are empowered through that information to take the right action. But only when we take the right action have we really empowered ourselves. You couldn't know and not do this. And again, I've used the comment on the show, the saying by the Taoist philosopher Yang Ming, who said, to know and not to do is not to know. If we don't convert knowledge into action, it's useless, it's meaningless. It carries with it no power. It becomes power in the action stage, which is the male principle. We opened ourselves up to knowledge using the feminine principle of receptivity, of opening our minds. That's the feminine principle. But then proper moral action in the world is the male principle that has to be employed once we have the knowledge. And I'll tell you what, there are so many people out there. Again, I can go right back. We need to go no further than members of my family. And I know I talk about this a lot because, you know, why talk about something that is farther outside? Let's use the closest relationships that we have. Let's let it hit home. Okay? Before I talk about anybody else, the first person I talk about is myself. Did I do this? Well, the answer is yes. I did make this change. I did make this fundamental shift in awareness and action. I made that paradigm change, that shift in consciousness when it comes to what I'm talking about. So then, before we go anywhere else farther outside of my circle of acquaintances, let's look at members of my family who I have brought this to the attention of. Have many of them changed what they're eating and drinking? Absolutely not. Maybe at one or two, but the vast majority, even if they know this, they'll say, yes, I know what's wrong with the food, because they're so conditioned to want to taste. It's like a little child. I know that's bad for me, but I don't want to give up the taste that I'm so conditioned to have, bombarding my taste buds. I'm used to having this kind of food in the house at any time that I want to taste this kind of taste. I don't want to taste something different. I'm used to this. It's all fear-based, and it's all self-imposed torment. This is self-imposed suffering. People who have health conditions, heart disease, cancer, still eating the same junk. And people will ask, well, how could this be? Because their will is destroyed. They do not have the will to change. The will is destroyed through the food they eat. It's just catch-22. It's a vicious circle. I don't have the will to change the food I eat because my will has been destroyed by the food I eat. I mean, it sounds comical if it weren't so sad. The other component of it is what they take in through the media every day of their lives, what they take in through their eyes and ears, and that's the other component of this. We talked about that in past weeks on this show. These two things go hand in hand. What we pay attention to, what we watch, what we read, what we listen to, what we discuss, what we talk about, all of those are connected fundamentally to what we put into our body. Because it's not just what we put into our body, it's what we put into our body and mind. So the media and the food that we eat, they're completely intertwined. A couple of things that I want people to be aware of when it comes to food and things that are going on in government when it comes to food. If you haven't heard of this, it's something that you should definitely look into and research. It's called Codex Alimentarius. Now, big word there, okay? This is spelled C-O-D-E-X, Codex, okay? That means code in Latin. Alimentarius, A-L-I-M-E-N-T-A-R-I-U-S. That means food. So this is the food code, the code of food, okay? Codex Alimentarius, all right? This is legislation that is basically now making its way through the European Union that is, what its ultimate goal is to outlaw nutritious foods. It is to classify nutritious foods and the vitamin and mineral supplements that people choose to take as drugs. Therefore, they will be completely regulated and controlled by the government of the European Union. And this legislation is being proposed for the United States as well. Because once they pass it in a national superblock like the EU, then it will come under treaty and regulatory commissions and trade regulation in the United States. So they will try to pass similar legislation here. Codex Alimentarius. Two researchers that you should check out their work when it comes to codex is Ian Crane, I-A-N, Crane, C-R-A-N-E, Ian Crane. And another is Dr. Rima Laibow, R-I-M-A, Laibow is L-A-I-B-O-W. Check out their work about Codex Alimentarius. Maybe I'll post some lectures in the podcast on the podcast page with this show. For people who aren't aware, when I podcast this show, meaning when I post this archive of each show that I do, okay? It's recorded, and then I post it on my website. On the website, there's a tab on What on Earth is Happening. There's a tab in the main section, the main menu section, called Podcasts. If you click that tab, you'll see all of the shows that are archived on that page. You can listen to them or download them from there. You could put them on your portable digital music player. These are completely free. No registration or membership is required to download these or listen to them, okay? And with each show, I post a related section. So there is a related documents or related pictures. Every week there's related pictures. Some days when I talk about a document, there'll be a related document. Some days when I talk about videos or documentaries, I'll post related videos. So you can go there, and those are resources that you should employ. Again, these are confirmations. These are corroborations of the information that I am presenting on this show. So avail yourself of this information. I don't post it for my health. I post it so people can go and branch off into different topics of research and do your own research. That's what it's all about. Let's look at another piece of legislation, okay? Codex Alimentarius is something that is proposed in the EU, and again, they want to bring this over to the United States. It would be totally stringent regulations on vitamins, minerals, and basically it would make all of the supplements, dietary supplements, it would make them classified as drugs. So they would be treated as controlled substances. Now, one of the things we're going to talk about in connection with food, as I'll get into next week, is drugs in general being controlled substances. I think that's a ridiculous idea. I think there shouldn't be anything called a controlled substance. I think what we put into our own body is our own responsibility. Personal responsibility, individual responsibility. There should be education about substances. There should be responsible use of substances based on freedom of choice. But controlling drugs, deciding that what you can and cannot put into your own body, ridiculous. And anybody that really accepts this notion doesn't understand what true freedom is. They certainly don't understand what true responsibility is. And people will say, oh, but how people would act if they got on things. Yeah, maybe people would act irresponsibly if they took a substance and then acted crazy while on it. But then they should be held accountable for taking that substance and then acting crazy while on it. Personal responsibility and accountability for one's own actions. You want to drink tons of excessive amounts of alcohol and then beat your wife, you should be held accountable for beating your wife. If you want to smoke excessive amounts of marijuana and then go try to operate machinery and hurt yourself, well, you're going to be held accountable for it. You know, if you want to smoke, angel dust and then go try to drive a car and you kill somebody, you should be held accountable for killing somebody with a car. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't be allowed to choose what substances you put into your body. Why? Because it comes down to a fundamental principle of ownership. Who owns the body? Do you own your body or does someone else own your body? Well, if you own your body, only you are responsible for what you put into it. If someone else owns your body, they can tell you what you may or may not put into it. I happen to fall on the former side of that equation and think I own my own body. I don't think I own my own body. I'm certain of it. I'm absolutely 100% sure that I own my own body. The body is my vehicle for the expression of my consciousness in this reality. Therefore, I own it. I'm the steward of it while I inhabit it. While my spirit inhabits this body, I'm the steward of it, a.k.a. the owner of it. Therefore, I get to tell me what goes into my body and what does not. That's what freedom is. That's what personal responsibility is. People want to hand that over to somebody else and say, you make the decision over what's okay for me to put into my body. That's all it really comes down to. People want to run away from personal responsibility. So getting back to government regulation, that's what led into that. And we'll talk about that next week. We'll get into psychedelics a little bit, maybe also, when we get into the medicine component of this, okay? That'll be for another week. The House Resolution 875, look into that piece of nasty legislation that's circulating in the United States Congress. H.R. 875. Disgraceful legislation that wants to try to ban organic gardening for personal use. Control all sources of food. Control all sources of dietary supplements. Absolutely absurd. Reclassify things as drugs. These people have a God complex. Their power, their corrupt power has gone to their head. And they think they're God. That's what this is all ultimately about. You want to know what it's about? That's it, right there in a nutshell. Controllers think they can get away with anything because they make laws and hide behind laws and think they're above the very laws they make. And they think they can dictate to the people of the earth as gods. Just as an aside, I see we have a caller. Caller, please hold on. I'm going to get to you in 1 second. But just as a brief aside, when it comes to lawmaking, there's a law going around in New York City that wants to try to ban used book sales, that you're not allowed to resell a book. I mean, this is the beginning of book burning, essentially. And they're going to do it through bureaucracy, through legislation. I want to tell you, you can't sell a book to another person. Stores can't sell used books, only books that are printed now. Because they want to remove some of those out-of-print books that have a lot of valuable information in them from public circulation. It's just another power play to control information. And imagine that there are people who would even entertain this notion and vote on it. There's even worse, there are cops that would go and enforce this nonsense. Imagine this. Imagine how dumb you would have to be to enforce a piece of nonsense like that. How shut down your consciousness would have to be. Yeah, that's what jelly donuts and tons of diet soda will do to a human brain. And, say I'm caustic about the way I word it. I really could care less, okay? This is why food is so important, because you have brain-damaged Neanderthals that would go and actually do that for a paycheck. I'm going to prevent you from selling a used book? Really? Really? This is what it's come to. For real? I don't even know what to say about it. I'm speechless. Caller from Southeast Pennsylvania, you are on live on What on Earth is Happening. What do you have for us?
Hi, Mark. It's Chris.
Chris, how are you, man?
Good, Mark. Mark, listen, I did watch that video, Russell Blaylock, with the excitotoxins. I found that very informative.
Yes.
And somewhat scary. The other thing I wanted to mention, and you kind of touched on it with the House bill, this legislation is very close. It's closer than people think. There's a Senate bill, S510. I noticed when I started talking about Codex Alimentarius about 6 months ago, people thought I was crazy. And I tried to tell them, it does exist. They are holding conferences every year. And I just got blank stares.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they don't want to believe that this is what it has come to. They don't want to believe that this is what's taking place right under their nose. I mean, this is publicly available. You can go right to the government site. I'll post the link to HR 875.
Right. I asked my mom, because I was trying to figure out what it's going to take to wake the general people up. And I asked my mom, this is a while ago, I said, if the government says that you can't take your vitamins or that nutritious food is illegal or regulated, are you going to stand up on your hind legs then? And my mom said, yes, she would. I'm saying, okay, so there's the line. If they go that far, maybe that's the line. But, you know, I tell my folks about the aspartame. The problem is that, you know, that stuff's so damaging to your brain, I think, your blood-brain barrier, and it's addictive. So, like, they're hooked on it. Anything diet, any kind of diet soda, anything like that. Diet yogurt, anything diet. And they don't even call it aspartame anymore. They call it phenylalanine because they try to hide it. Just like you're saying about the crystalline fructose, they try to hide what it really is. Right. And, you know, and they call that MSG hydrogenated corn oil or whatever it is. And they're trying to trick people so they can't. And now I'm also hearing now that, you know, they're saying we're not going to disclose what's in stuff anymore.
Oh.
Like, whoa.
Yeah, they don't want to have to list the poisonous ingredients that are in food on the label, on the ingredients label. And this is why, you know, we should hold people's feet to the fire about insisting that this is on the food labels of the food we purchase and eat. We have to know what the ingredients are of what we're buying. That's how we can make informed decisions. And ultimately, this power to change what is put into our food lies with the people who buy this. Because if they don't buy this junk, the manufacturers will have no choice but to stop making food with this junk in it. It's all about voting with what we purchase to eat. And people keep going to the same stores and keep buying the same sewage. They're going to keep, the manufacturers are going to keep making things with the same sewage in it.
Yeah, it's the same vicious circle that you noted that in the media. It's the same thing with food. I mean, like you just said, the food has taken away their will to stop eating the bad food. And
yes, exactly.
Honestly, I don't know how you break that cycle. I think it's an act of God that breaks that cycle because, you know, I talk to people in my family and no one listens to me at all. And honestly, some of the stuff I read about, I'm like, this can't be true. And then you look into it, you're like, it is true. It's so far out there that even, you know, you can't believe it's true. I expect them to believe it's true. But see, my folks, at least the older generation, they believe the government's going to protect them. They believe that the FDA is going to protect them and look out for them. Well, that's a bunch of garbage. It's just the opposite. And I told my mom, I said, when you start worrying about your government, that's when you're going to wake up. I told her, look, if you guys are not worried about your government, then you have nothing to worry about in life. But if you have a concern about your government maybe not looking out for the best of you, now you might have some concerns that you might want to start looking into.
Chris, I'm going to tell you what basically does get people out of that cycle. And it's really the only thing that can get someone out of that cycle. And that is the admission to oneself of the 3 most powerful words that are ever spoken. I was wrong. That's it. You have to look at the availability of information, like David Icke said last weekend in New York City. The best way to start is with a blank page. You have to give up your assumptions of what you think you know. Start with a blank page and then start doing your research. And don't bring any of your baggage in with you when you do the research. Watch, read, listen, and you have to take in information from an eclectic variety of sources. This means very wide and varied. That's what eclectic means. All over the spectrum, basically. Okay? You have to take in information through an eclectic variety of sources. And then you have to weigh all of that information and come to your own conclusions about what actually is. And the only way you can do that is if you put the time in, you put the attention in, and you then weigh that information in the balance in a critical way. And then you can say, does this fit? Does the conclusion I have come to fit with my former way of seeing the world, my former perceptions? And if the answer is yes, then go right ahead. Go eat your junk. Okay, go eat the sewage and the excitotoxins and the high fructose corn syrup and the trans fats and enjoy the state of health that you garner as a result of eating like that. And enjoy your frequent trips to the hospital in your older years, and enjoy, the surgeries that you'll need and the medications you'll need to be put on and the amount of money that'll cost you. Enjoy that. But if it doesn't fit in with that former worldview that you held, then you have to say something to yourself. You have to say, I was wrong. And that's the beginning of coming out of that cycle. Once that admission is made, then and only then can you really employ the will to change your behavior and change your diet. And the reason this is so important is because this thing, diet, what we choose to put into our body is still, this day, is still largely within our own ability to control. And if we don't do things to hold people's feet to the fire to keep, the availability of nutritious food, the availability of dietary supplements, etc., of clean sources of water, we're going to lose that ability to maintain a modicum of control over what we put into our body. That's why this issue is so critically important. Yeah, the beginning of that process is opening up to the idea that you may not have all the information and you may be wrong about what you currently think about how you eat. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, they made that point in one of the documentaries you put up, I think it was Food Inc., where they said, they gave the example of human growth hormone, how the public stood up and said, no, we're not putting up with this, and pretty much put that issue to rest. And you're right. I mean, as long as we don't go too far down the road and we're getting to that point, we will be able to vote with our dollars. And if we say we don't want it, then we won't buy it. But and they'll have to come up with something else. Like you have to keep trying, and I'm sure they will. But if we go too far down the road, we become into that vicious circle like you're talking about, where we don't have the ability anymore to discern. And it's funny you mentioned the I was wrong, because that to me is a prerequisite to have the blank slate. You have to be able to say that. And I was talking to someone last night about that on the phone, and I said, what was it that Fonzie could never say on Happy Days? He could never say these three words.
Right.
And that was a lesson. And, of course, the dope I was talking to, he didn't understand what I was saying. But right. He's asleep as can be. But I said he couldn't say I was wrong because that's the hardest thing to do. But, see, right. I've done that. I've done it with ease. Was I fooled? Yes. But you know what? I'd rather be fooled 42 years of my life and then pick up the pieces and learn the remainder than to just keep insisting, no, I'm right, no, I'm right, and then suffering as a result.
That's right. That's exactly right. That is just a brilliant point right there. That's what it's all about. Fonzie couldn't say, I'm sorry. The words just couldn't come out of his mouth.
I was wrong. He goes, I was rude. He couldn't say wrong. And I thought it was very appropriate because it's not easy to admit you're wrong. But you know what? If you're going to move on and start over, you have to do it. And we all have to do it. I mean, at some point, I think a lot of people are going to say they were wrong when they start seeing the tangible effects of their being misled.
Right. And even sometimes they won't bend. They'll go to the grave. I'm telling you, members of my family have cancer, have contracted cancer, had parts of their body cut out and still won't change their diet. Walking around with hernias because they're overweight. Walking around with all kinds of heart conditions and diseases.
All I could say is
congestive heart failure. I'm sorry?
I'm sorry. All I can say is that if you're at that point, you've pretty much given up.
Oh, yeah. You don't have any self-respect for yourself. There's such little will there that you just say, oh, I've done this far. I don't care what I do to my body. Let me tell you a little anecdote, okay? And this connects in a little bit what we're going to talk about next week. I'm a psychedelic voyager. I have been in the past, okay? Psychedelics are something that I've used as a tool. I've communed with certain consciousnesses through psychedelic mediums, shall we say, okay? I think that's every being's birthright if they choose to enter that space. Now, while communing with the psilocybin mushroom one day in the past, and this is when I was not eating so well, let's just say, that's an understatement, okay? The psychedelic voice in the throes of the psychedelic experience basically said, stop neglecting the body. The body is not to be neglected in this equation. The body is important. The body is needed. It is an integral part of the whole. That's what the voice of that communion said. And that is what psychedelics are. It's an active form of communion. Entheogenic compounds. We'll talk about this a little bit next week. But I'd like to just share that as a personal experience. That communion, the voice of that communion basically said, what you're doing with the body is wrong. Stop ignoring it. You know a little bit about the spiritual side of this, about the mental aspect of it, but you're largely ignoring the body aspect of it. You know, this information about food came to me the latest in this awakening, believe it or not. I wish it were the other way around. I wish I would have woken up to this early in the process of awakening. But the food connection, about how they destabilize the mind-body connection, that came to me as one of the last pieces of the puzzle, believe it or not.
Probably would have been easier for you because you would have been more predisposed to take in the information faster.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Chris, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks so much for calling in.
Appreciate it. But one thing I want to say, Mark, is I am not a tent pitcher. I'm going to the top of the mountain or I'm going to die trying. You can take that to the bank.
Well, I salute you for that, man, and we'll be going there together, my friend.
All right, thanks, Mark. You take care.
You too, man. Bye. Good night. I was talking about this with a friend earlier. The callers that we get into this show, again, always amaze me, always surprise me, and I'm always delighted because I think we get the best callers into this show than any other show on the internet, on alternative media, period, as far as I'm concerned. It's just great to see, and it's great to see people really opening up and really deeply integrating some of these concepts and some of this information. Let's see. Okay, I have a few other things about food, and then, like I said, next week we'll get into the pharmaceutical industry and how they're really creating more problems than they solve, putting people on these artificial chemical compounds that we call drugs, and not telling them about how so many health disorders can be cured and basically solved by bringing the body back to balance with the food that we put into our body. And it's so sad that these fields are so disconnected, that medicine is so disconnected from nutrition. These things need to be hand in hand, and yet they are dichotomized. Again, the first doctor of Western civilization, Hippocrates, the Greek doctor who the Hippocratic Oath is named after, Hippocrates, said, "Let thy food be thy medicine, and thy medicine be thy food." And this is a fundamental principle that people should be living by today in the modern world, but sadly, so few people are. I go to families' houses, and I see tons and tons and tons of medication piled up, bottle after bottle after bottle, taking 18, 19, 20, 25 pills a day. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. Let's run down the list again and just see if there's anything I still want to cover. I want to, again, thank Barb for helping me compile this list, because I knew there was so many things that you could get to about talking about food that this could be a whole show in and of itself. And there are many people that this is what they talk about on their show, and do a whole radio program centered on this, because it's such a big field and it is so important to what's going on in the world. We talked about deceptive labels. We talked about GMO. We talked about the legislation that they're passing. I mentioned some of the documentaries. Look on the podcast for this show for some new documentaries this week that I'll post links to, as many as I can find that I mentioned here tonight. Let's see. Next week we'll talk about unnecessary drugs that people take that can be solved with natural remedies. Surgery, it's another thing that is sold a lot of times that are unnecessary. Surgeries, because these are the two main selling points for hospitals and doctors. They want to sell you their main products, and their main products are drugs and surgery. That's what they're there to sell. Vaccines and flu shots we'll look at, and we will look at antidepressants, the SSRI classification of medications. These are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and I have a lot of information that I want to share on those and what they basically do. So that'll be next week. Let's see if I skipped over anything on the list here. People should take a look at the movie Super Size Me. That's something that came out a couple of years ago. A man basically lived on McDonald's food only, for months, and basically wanted to see what would happen to his physiology, to his overall state of health, if he just ate nothing but McDonald's food for a month. And it's an interesting documentary, Super Size Me. Something we didn't talk about yet is, I talk about organic, locally grown food as being one of the solutions to this mess that we've gotten ourselves into when it comes to what's in our food. Yet, look at how overpriced some of this food is. And this is also by design. We can't just think that some of these people who own these supermarket chains are, such wonderful humanitarians because they're offering a better dietary choice and a better selection than our conventional supermarket. These people are largely in it to make a profit. And the ridiculous way that some of these organic foods are overpriced are just locking so many people out of doing what's right because they can't afford it. Especially people with larger families that have to really, really worry about this stuff because they're feeding children, not just themselves. But, Whole Foods is no angel. For people that shop there. I love the store. I think it's great. I shop there sometimes, but they're no angels. They're jacking up their prices to ridiculous levels because they know that they can charge a premium and get away with it because they know organic whole food is in demand. They know people fundamentally recognize, whether at a conscious or unconscious level, that something isn't right with the food that they've traditionally been getting, that they have to eat more to get the same amount of nutrient value, that the nutrient density of their food is completely depleted, that there's toxins and additives and preservatives and chemicals laden throughout their food. There are people who know about this, and when they go to an alternative choice like a Whole Foods, they find that they have to pay twice the amount that they were paying for conventionally grown foods, which is ridiculous because they're using practices that are actually not as difficult and not as time-consuming and not as dependent on so many other variables to do it. It's a more holistic and natural way of farming. I don't see why that would cost so exorbitantly much more than conventionally grown food. I guess it's because of the bulk that it's done in, because it's done at a not as large of a bulk production rate. But still, if you look at the profit margins of a place like Whole Foods, come on. It's rape is what it is. Trader Joe's, a little bit better. The selection, not quite as good as a place like Whole Foods. I don't know if you have these in the area of the country where you're at, but we do in Pennsylvania. And I think Trader Joe's is a great store. I think they're a little bit more in keeping with a little bit fairer pricing ranges than someplace like Whole Foods. But if anybody wants to call in and bring up some names of other places where they shop that might be, a chain that other people can look into in their part of the country, feel free. You're welcome to do so. So pricing, that's another thing that keeps a lot of people out of this. They want to shop for convenience and price. And because organics aren't omnipresent, they may have to travel a little bit further. And people are loath to do that. It upsets their normal routine, their normal schedule. I had to drive 2 blocks to go to the supermarket. Now I have to drive 12 or 20. Be surprised. You would be surprised at what turns a lot of people off to do things that they know they should be doing, but they want to just be lazy. They want to take a shortcut. It's the same thing. People think they're going to get to the goal. They're going to get to the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, and they're never going to learn about any of this stuff. It'll just magically happen. Magically. The world will suddenly magically transform itself. You won't have to do any deep reading. You won't have to amalgamate large quantities of information and weigh that with your own critical thinking capabilities. Oh, no. It'll just happen magically on its own. You'll just wish for it, and then it'll suddenly take place. This fake notion of the law of attraction. Think about what you want and it magically comes to you. And the law of attraction doesn't work like that, folks. If you believe it does, you need to get off the New Age drug that you've been taking, because that's not how it works. It's about will. That's why the dominators, and we've talked about this before, that's why they're so successful. They have the will to do what they're doing. They think, feel, and act as one. They're not in opposition. And people don't want to hear that. They don't want to study the occult. Oh, yeah, we'll magically get out of this prison that we've worked ourselves into, and none of us will have to learn anything about the occult. Right. Sure you will. Sure you will. Caller from Ohio. I know who this is. You're on What on Earth is Happening. What do you have for us?
Hello, Mark. How are we doing tonight? It's Bob.
Bob, how are you? Good to hear from you.
Good, good. Hey, I didn't know if you brought up the topic of irradiated food.
I did not. Thank you. That is something that I glossed over, but definitely they are irradiating food to try, ostensibly to kill microbes and bacteria. And what this is doing is changing the fundamental cellular structure of the food that we eat, and ultimately that comes down to changing the fundamental structure of our bodies, because we are what we eat. And it is also robbing the nutrient value, and it is also killing live enzymes that are necessary in the food for us to take in as nature intended it. So yes, very, very important information. Thank you, Bob, for bringing that up. It's something I missed, definitely.
Oh, that's my pleasure, Mark. Excellent topic tonight. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, don't forget that just as Mark very eloquently pointed out, the idea, or what is sold to us as the public, is that we're going to protect you from all the harmful bacteria and virus-like things that we like to put in your flu shots, but instead we're going to protect you from that in your food. But what they are doing is exactly what Mark described. They are killing every bit of nutrition inside. They're erasing it. Just imagine it being on a white, from a colored piece of fruit to a white, pale, opaque piece of fruit, and that is where we're at. But it still looks that wonderful, painful, pinkish hue at the grocery store. You know, those tomatoes that have never seen the light of day. What garbage I am putting in my system. And you brought up, Mark, that it is very expensive to switch over to an organic diet if you can even find true organic food. Food is labeled these days organic, and it is not organic. So people have to do more homework to get to what is really, and you brought up Ezekiel bread. Thank you, Mark. If you, Mark, could post on your site some recommended items or chains or what have you, or food categories and the different kinds of brands that might be good for us to check out? I know I need that information. And thank you, Mark. And one last thing, Mark.
Yes.
Next week, when you're going to touch on psilocybin and the sacred mushroom, because, ladies and gentlemen, we've been indoctrinated in our culture that the mushroom, the magic mushroom, so to speak, that's that hippie drug. It could be no farther from the truth. This is a sacred mushroom that was part of our reality in the ancient days, which has been washed out of our culture. And now they put drugs that are horrible. Those are the true compounds that are for the worst psychedelic. I'm talking about the Holy Communion, as Mark participated in with the Spirit. This is the manna from heaven that would disappear quickly in the sunlight underneath the pine trees. This is where Christmas has gathered around. Even today, the Catholic garb will show the priest in gold regalia with red shoulder boards and a white decoration, because it represents the sacred Amanita muscaria. Look up John Allegro, The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross. He was Britain's chosen scholar to go to Israel in the early 50s, late 40s, to be the first British subject to look at the scrolls, to look at them up close. And he transcribed a magical cult that was around Christianity, that was the cult of Christianity, and that we later, the Catholic Church, I might say, and I don't want to bash anybody's religion, but this was the culprit in this mess. They stamped out the cult of the mushroom. And Mark, I am so looking forward, and we know why, because only by the priest can you get to God, right? Only the taker of the mushroom can talk to God, right? They took that away from us, and we're gaining it back as we move forward. We are taking that back into our arsenal, into our own personal medicine cabinet, because the medicine is coming back, the true medicine of the shaman, of the Indians, and even our culture from long ago. We're taking it back. Mark, thank you for this program, and I'm so looking forward to next week's show as well.
Bob, thanks so much, as always. Appreciate it.
Good night, Mark.
Good night. Absolutely. There is a reason that they basically turned communion into a dead thing. Religion turned communion into something that is inert, that does not react with us, that does not commune with us. It is just something that is consumed. And it is a symbol only now. In the past, communion was an active thing. It actually changed consciousness to show you the higher level of consciousness that was available to you. Then it brought you back down to the level that you were at to show you this is your work. Your work is to integrate that level of higher awareness into your life here and now. And that's what communion is supposed to be. If we break down the word communion into its etymological components, so we do the etymology of the word, C-O-M, the root in Latin means together, to bring together. C-O-M. And then munio, M-U-N-I-O, munio, munire, in Latin, means to strengthen or to build. So, to come together in communion is to strengthen, to become strengthened together, or to build together. That's what communion is. That's what a true community is. People who come together to strengthen each other and to build together. Builders. Right in the word, it's right there in communion. But, sadly, the active component of true communion, of the mystery traditions throughout time, the true positive mystery traditions, has been relegated to an inert substance, a piece of unleavened bread. The mushroom is a sacred communion. That's what it is. And it should be treated as such with that kind of reverence that goes along with something like that. Because it is something that is truly capable if used in the proper context. I am in no way advocating to play around with these things. And they're not even things. They're beings. Don't play around and play games with these consciousnesses, because you'll get stung hard, too. Not gently, either. You go into that in ego, guaranteed you're not coming out in too much ego. That's why people who are really egoic don't want any dealings with this. They want to stay in their ego state. You know, they wouldn't dare commune with the higher mind of the psilocybin mushroom, because it would do a number on them. Believe it. It would break down that ego real quick. But that's what it is, and we'll get into that a little bit next week when we talk about drugs, and we'll look at alternatives to those things. You know, particularly when it comes to the psychological community, what the things that psychiatry is doing, putting people on different classes of psychoactive compounds, artificial psychoactive compounds, is ridiculous. So we'll look at that coming up next week. Thanks, Bob, for bringing that to the attention of the listening audience. So we've covered a lot of ground here. We have a couple minutes left. Want to just remind people, please keep an eye out. The show may be changing time over the next couple of weeks. We may be going from 8 to 10 p.m., so keep that in mind. Check out the website. As Bob said, as Bob asked, I will try to do my best. I'll try to post some links to some better food stores, better places to shop, some things to be made aware of, some of the things we talked about on the show tonight. I'll post links to documentaries for people to check out. Avail yourself of these resources. Go up to whatonearthishappening.com. Check out the podcast page, and you'll see the related documents and video section, photo document and video section posted there with the podcast. So I think that's it. We'll call it quits here for tonight. And again, next week's show, we will talk about drugs, the pharmaceutical industry, and the industry of the treatment of disease, not going down to the causal factors of disease, of imbalance, but just treating the symptoms of the disease. We'll talk about unnecessary drugs and surgery as being the main products of this industry. We'll get into vaccines and flu shots, which is a real big hot topic going around, especially nowadays. We'll get into HMOs and insurance companies. We'll talk about antidepressants, and we'll also talk about psychedelics a little bit. So that's all for tonight. I'll see you here next Tuesday night, same time, 7 o'clock p.m. I'm Mark Passio. You've been listening to What on Earth is Happening right here on the Revolution Broadcasting Internet Radio Network. Good night, everyone.